Today, a video has been released showing how the occupiers brutally killed a warrior who bravely said to their faces, "Glory to Ukraine." I want us all to respond to his words in unity. Glory to the hero. Glory to the heroes. Glory to Ukraine.
That horrifying video comes as Zelensky is sending reinforcements to Bakhmut, a city on the cusp of falling to Russia. This is video of that fight from Ukrainian soldiers' point of view. That's what we have in today. And after months of war, hundreds and thousands of lives are lost, tens of thousands of lives. Fighters with the brutal private army, the Wagner Group, can be seen tearing down a Ukrainian flag on top of a monument in the city and replacing it with a Wagner flag. Now, I should just emphasize it's a Wagner flag. It is not a Russian flag. This is a mercenary group fighting for Putin. And such that defines the victory, it would still be a small victory of what's left of a decimated city with little strategic value. And a victory would come at incredible cost. NATO intelligence tonight says Putin has lost 5 men for every Ukrainian soldier fighting in the months-long combat around Bakhmut. The word victory itself becomes even more meaningless in that context. That flag, right, as I mentioned, that they were hanging there on that monument, not even the Russian flag, flying atop a now uninhabitable horror zone. And what is a victory when you cannot move forward or defend what you've won? Because the head of the Wagner Group, after hanging that flag, says he does not have ammo or reinforcements to move ahead.
I'm knocking on all doors, sounding the alarm with ammunition and reinforcements, as well as covering our flanks. If everyone stays coordinated, without hubris, ups, or throwing tantrums, then we will seal off the armed forces of Ukraine. If this doesn't happen, then we're all
Yevgeny Prigozhin says Russia needs to work together. But when you listen to the men on the front lines, it is very clear that they are not. It appears to be every man for himself.
We are not provided with strategy and tactics. We're being sent into assaults. There is no cooperation with commanders. Fire support is lacking. Weapons from the 1940s are being used, including mortars and guns. In our first assault, 6 people died in one trench.
6 soldiers, 1 attack, 1 trench. Again, the NATO estimate, Russia is said to be losing 5 men for every Ukrainian loss. Meanwhile, in Russia, the Kremlin tightening its grip on dissenters, today delaying the trial of a prominent Putin critic, Vladimir Kara-Murza, until August. Kara-Murza has survived 2 alleged poisonings and was arrested again nearly a year ago for criticizing Putin's invasion of Ukraine. In just a moment, I'm going to speak with Kara-Murza's wife. But first, I want to go to Fred Pleiken, out front live tonight in Moscow. And Fred, Prigozhin leading this incredibly costly battle for Bakhmut tonight. What else is he saying?
Hi there, Aaron. Well, he's saying it's going to be a lot more costly in the days to come. He says that he believes that there's still thousands of Ukrainians inside Bakhmut and many more outside of Bakhmut trying to hold them up. And he believes that they are going to continue to offer stiff resistance against those Wagner forces and against the Russian military, even as the Russian Defense Ministry is saying they believe the city is almost completely surrounded. And one of the things that we're seeing on the ground here is that standoff between Yevgeny Prigozhin of Wagner and the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu seems to be getting more fierce. Here's what we're learning. Russian troops allegedly advancing in close quarters combat. Moscow's defense ministry released this video of what it says are airborne units assaulting Ukrainian positions. And Russia's defense minister is keen to show he's taken the reins of what the Kremlin still calls its special military operation. Sergei Shoigu choppering to the front lines, his ministry says, and handing out medals to soldiers there. Good luck, success, and come home alive, his sparse words to the troops. But progress remains slow for the Russian army, except in Bakhmut, where the defense minister's arch-nemesis Yevgeny Prigozhin of the Wagner private military company is leading the charge. Prigozhin advertising for new recruits.
Fellas, Bakhmut is behind me. Join the strongest private army in the world. Take the side of justice.
Despite what the US and Ukraine say is a massive attrition rate among Wagner mercenaries, Prigozhin claims he is the one handing Vladimir Putin victories, and he warns Russia could lose the war if he doesn't get the ammo and the fighters he wants.
If Wagner Group retreats from Bakhmut now, the whole front will collapse. Today, Wagner Group is the cement that holds it together. We're pulling in the whole Ukrainian army, grinding them up and destroying them, not letting them focus on other parts of the front line.
And while Prigozhin was busy this weekend trolling Ukrainian women by sending them champagne from a defunct winery near Bakhmut, he also made clear Wagner is here to stay, whether the Russian Defense Ministry likes it or not.
After Wagner Group takes Bakhmut, we will continue to defend our country, and the Wagner Group does not care what some other departments want.
While some believe the infighting could become a problem for Vladimir Putin, Andrei Kolesnikov of the Carnegie Endowment tells me Russia's leader is fully in command of the situation.
I'm sure that he's controlled totally by Kremlin. It is allowed for him to criticize official bodies, official governors, official leadership of Ministry of Defense. But Putin lacks this small fight of clans. He simply observes the situation.
And Aaron, back to that situation around Bakhmut, tonight advisor to President Zelensky's office, Mikhailo Podolyak, who of course has been on your show, he says that he believes in the end of things, the holding of Bakhmut will be a big success for the Ukrainian military. He says it's helped to hold the Russian army up, to also grind the Russian army down, but also offer the Ukrainians the chance to train their military, equip their military for a possible counteroffensive. Of course, we know from President Zelensky himself tonight that the Ukrainians not yet ready to give up Bakhmut. Aaron.
All right. Thank you very much, Fred, reporting live from Moscow tonight. Out front now, retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. And Colonel, I appreciate your time. So, you've seen the video of what appears to be that Ukrainian prisoner of war executed in a barrage of bullets. And it brings home the reality of the horror on the ground right now. It just is one horrible, horrible thing happening. And there are so many more like it.
Yeah, that's for sure, Aaron. And it's, one of the key things about this war is this utter brutality. We have to remember the Russians are not following the laws of war, the laws of armed conflict. They are not handling this in a just way. And that is really one of the reasons that the Ukrainians are fighting so hard for their land.
And you just heard Fred talking about the Podolyak, the chief of staff, sort of for Zelensky, who was saying that they think Bakhmut will be a big success for Ukraine. And I mentioned the NATO analysis showing Russian troops dying in Bakhmut 5-1 in terms of Russians to Ukrainians. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry says it's 7 Russians to every Ukrainian. Now, every one of these is a human life. But what does the ratios here mean for the battle that Ukraine is still, as Fred makes clear, determined to fight in Bakhmut?
Yeah, well, clearly the Ukrainians have had a great deal of success numerically, and those ratios, whether it's 5-1 or 7-1, it clearly indicates that the Ukrainians have done a much better job from a military perspective. The key thing to remember, though, is that Ukraine is about 1/4 the size of Russia in terms of population and in terms of the military. So these ratios, while they do give
You're
Ukraine,
sort of treading water.
Yeah, they're treading water. Exactly. A little bit more than treading water, but that's the key thing, Aaron. So this is, it's good for Ukraine, but it is not enough to really overcome the numerical advantages that the Russians have.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Colonel. Thank you.
You bet, Aaron.
And now, Yevgenia Kara-Murza, the wife of Vladimir Kara-Murza. And Yevgenia, I really appreciate your time tonight. So your husband was in court today. I know it was a pretrial hearing, and then his detention period gets extended. What can you tell us about where his case even stands right now?
Yeah, so this is going to be only the second state visit of Biden's presidency, which makes this, a very, very big deal for the South Koreans. The White House picked South Korea over a host of other allies it could have hosted for such a dinner. The only other president who has gotten this sort of pomp and circumstance, and for people who don't really know what goes into a state visit, President Biden meets with foreign leaders all the time. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz was here last week. A number of other leaders have come through, the Brazilian president. Lula. So he meets with foreign leaders all the time. The difference is with a state visit, there is a lot more pomp and circumstance. And of course, there's the state dinner, which is very sort of entertaining for everyone. You've got all these gowns and the works and the White House laying out its fanciest china. And so it's really a sort of an event that's become much more rare with the pandemic, and in general that we don't see a ton. And so the only other president who's gotten this sort of event is Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. And that was, at the time the White House said that was because France's America's oldest ally. It made sense to give him the first one. Macron is one of the longest-serving leaders in Europe. And, of course, the relationship between France and the United States is always important, but has been very important when it comes to the war in Ukraine. So for President Biden to decide to give South Korea only the second such visit of his presidency, I think is a really important signal of how importantly he views the need to push back against North Korea, which has launched an unprecedented number of missile tests while Biden has been president, of course, has nuclear ambitions, and it's just been very bellicose, and encountering China, which has been aggressive and in which the Biden administration has taken some pretty aggressive policies towards. And the U.S.-China relationship is sort of at an all-time low, the lowest it's been in decades. So the fact that, this will be only the second state visit, the first with an Asian leader. The South Korean president is not an experienced leader. He has only been in office. He was elected only a year ago. He doesn't really have foreign policy experience. He's a bit of a political novice. So I think this is just a very clear signal of how much Biden and his administration view the importance of building alliances in the Indo-Pacific and countering North Korea and China. He does, and he has some controversial policies himself when it comes to managing North Korea. He's had some very low approval ratings in the first year. They sort of stabilize now where they're hovering around 40%, which is kind of similar to President Biden. His approval ratings are in the low 40s. And then, of course, another big element of this is that the U.S. has worked pretty hard to try to improve the relationship between South Korea and Japan, which, historically has had an extremely contentious relationship filled with a lot of animosity from when Japan had colonized South Korea. And Yoon has taken some kind of controversial steps to try to have a better relationship with Japan, sort of viewing the importance that these two countries be aligned when it comes to countering North Korea and China in the region.
Derek Overstreet here from the New Millennium Group. Listen, what I'm hearing a lot of is that folks would love to have an income plan that is specially made just for them, that provides an income stream that they cannot outlive as long as they're living. If you'd like a copy of one, give me a call at 888-999-6370. That's 888-999-6370 or utahsfinancialplanner.com. We're standing by right now.
Well, what the Biden White House has, and you've seen, the president, of course, President Biden has met with the leader of Japan. He's met with the leader of South Korea on the sidelines of many of these summits, and he's also held trilateral meetings with them. So, one more high-profile example is when he was in Asia back in November. He held a fairly high-profile trilateral meeting with South Korea and Japan, and the U.S. has they've put out some joint statements. The president has responded very quickly to when South Korea and Japan have come up with new economic frameworks or agreements, sort of, trying to send a signal of how closely he's following this and how important it is for him that these two countries have better relations. And, these are two of the most powerful leaders, two of the most powerful countries in Asia, aside from China. And I think, in the White House's view, a better relationship between those two countries and a stronger trilateral relationship between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan can only be helpful and can only strengthen the U.S.'s position when it comes to dealing with a rising China and a North Korea that is, launching long-range missiles and a ton of missiles into the sea and just being very provocative.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, Yasmin, before I let you go, because I always love your forward-looking vision and what you're watching for as these things start to evolve. So as you look forward to this state visit, again, all the pomp and circumstance that will go along with that, the message that will send and be covered by other outlets around the world, what are you watching for? In particular, do you expect to see any saber rattling or any ratcheting up from North Korea or China? How do you expect things over the next few weeks before this state visit actually happens?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, already you've seen right before this was announced that China's leader, Xi Jinping, had blamed the U.S., I think just yesterday, for trying to curtail China's ambitions and, basically criticizing the U.S. for trying to contain China's rise. So I would be interested to see if Xi responds in any way ahead of the state visit. And then, of course, the big thing is going to be, does North Korea do something especially provocative before Yoon comes to the United States to try to send a signal or to try to cast a pall over the whole visit?
So important, and we'll continue to watch that. And Yasmin Abutaleb, of course, is the White House reporter for the Washington Post. And Yasmin, always appreciate you carving out time for us and some great perspective. We'll continue to watch this one as it moves forward.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Great perspective, as always, from Yasmin. I love the way she looks at a lot of these international perspectives and how things play out. It was really interesting. In her piece, she noted Jake Sullivan's comment as Biden's national security advisor. He said that the United States' commitment to the Republic of Korea is ironclad. And that sort of speaks to what Yasmin was talking about in terms of some of the Korean people wondering how committed the U.S. is to support them, to stand with them in the face of a very provocative China and North Korea. And so I think this is an important state visit. It sends all kinds of messages, some very overt, some very covert, that we have to keep watching and looking for the subtleties, especially as it relates to what's going on amazingly in Ukraine, as well as what's going on in Taiwan and in other places around the world. And I think it's so important that, again, this is a leadership issue. And the messages you send as a leader, especially in these kinds of events, these kinds of gatherings where you have an official state visit from the president of South Korea, the messages that will go out to all the audiences, the United States citizens, our allies in the region, in particular Japan and South Korea, those people, as well as to our enemies and those that we are struggling with in China, in North Korea, and in Russia. All of those are interconnected. And it takes a leadership strategy, a messaging strategy equal to the policy strategy. And that's going to be very interesting to watch as this state visit from South Korea comes over the next few weeks as we prepare for that. And again, it will have impact, not just here at home, but will literally reverberate around the world.
Ukrainian soldiers are still hanging on to a town in the east that Russian forces have been trying to occupy for months. The Russians insist that Bakhmut will soon be theirs, but Ukraine says their forces will stay as long as they can. NPR's Ukraine correspondent Joanna Kakissis talked to A. Martinez about the fight for this town.
Joanna, the focus on Bakhmut, why is it so important?
So, well, for the Russians, it would be their first significant victory in like 7 or 8 months. And, Russian President Vladimir Putin really needs a victory at this point. Ukrainian forces have pushed the Russians out of areas they occupied early in the war, like parts of the Kharkiv region where I am right now. And as for Ukrainians, Bakhmut has become a symbol of resistance against Russia, kind of like the city of Mariupol was in the early part of the war. And as this war drags on, the Ukrainians want to show that they will keep fighting for every inch of their land.
Joanna, can the Ukrainians hang on to this town? I mean, and why do they seem to want it so badly?
So based on the latest reports, it doesn't look good in Bakhmut for the Ukrainians right now. Some reports suggest that Russian forces are even in parts of the city already. And these forces include members of the Wagner Group, a private mercenary army which operates alongside Russian military units. And they say Bakhmut is mostly surrounded. So we asked a Ukrainian military spokesman about these developments. His name is Serhiy Cherevati, and he insists that these reports are, quote, Russian propaganda.
Russian propaganda is not reality. We are able to deliver ammunition, provisions, and medicine to our units in Bakhmut, and also take our wounded from Bakhmut.
He claims that Ukrainian soldiers are also exhausting the Russian forces in Bakhmut and depleting Russian stocks of ammunition and weapons. He would not confirm or deny that a couple of bridges have been blown up by the Ukrainians, which would indicate the beginning of a tactical withdrawal. But it is clear that the Ukrainians want to hang on to Bakhmut as long as possible. So Russian forces pay as high a price as possible for as long as possible before Ukrainian soldiers are forced to abandon the city.
But Joanna, I mean, after 7 months of constant fighting, I mean, what's left in that city?
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be much left of Bakhmut at this point, at least based on videos posted to social media. Imagine block after block of shelled and collapsed buildings, of heaps of smoldering rubble. And yet, incredibly, about 10% of the population still remains in Bakhmut, hundreds of people. Many of them are older people, though there are some children with them, and they are huddled in basements. without electricity or running water. We asked the military spokesman, Serhiy Cherevati, about this, and he told us that by law, Ukrainian forces cannot make these civilians evacuate.
We tell them that Russia is threatening you, but many people, especially those who are older, they are afraid of changing their surroundings. Maybe they think they will not be accepted anywhere else.
He says Ukrainian soldiers keep trying to remind these civilians that Bakhmut is the most dangerous place in the country right now.